Lieutenant General Subrata Saha is the former Deputy Chief of Army Staff and is a highly decorated officer with a career spanning nearly 4 decades. In his last assignment as Deputy Chief, he adopted the strategy of win Indian wars with Indian solutions and was driven by a strong collaborative process that involved academia, industries, and the army. He was also Deputy Regional Commander, United Nations Mission in Angola, and also has experience in other operational assignments, which has given him an in-depth understanding of conflict management. He has led disaster management operations in 4 districts of Orissa during the super cyclone 1999. His academic records include the Army Staff College in UK, the United States Army War College, and the Indian Army War College. He was adjudged as the best overseas student at the Staff College in United Kingdom. He is also a gold medalist at the Higher Command course in the Indian Army War College and is an MPhil in Defense Management from Indore University. Currently, he heads Secretary and Director General Society of Indian Defense Manufacturers. Sir, it is an honor to have you with us, and we're really honored to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you for getting me to talk to you guys. Feels nice and youthful seeing you people. One. Second is, in my current assignment, actually, I am a member of the National Security Advisory Board in Delhi.
Right.
This board advises the NSA and the PMO on security issues. So that's my current assignment right now. Yeah.
So just to repeat the first question. So we wanted to start by asking you about one of the most iconic reforms to our defense sector, which is the addition of the Chief of Defense Staff. What we wanted to know was, what is your take on this move?
Yeah, so first, this is long overdue. And we had, in fact, at the very inception, shall we say, in the 50s, started with joint training at the National Defense Academy level, where people from who are seeking commission to all the 3 services, Army, Navy, and Air Force, trained together. Okay, then we were the first to introduce a combined staff college in Wellington in the Nilgiris, where about 10 to 12 years service officers come there after, a sort of entrance examination, and they do a year-long course together. But there are other countries who have taken the cue from us. In fact, they have followed our model, like UK followed the combined staff college from us. Australia followed the National Defense Academy model from us. And so just as well, this was long overdue, as I said. And in 1999, the Kargil Review Committee, that committee that was formed after the Kargil War to go into multiple facets of national security, this was one of their very strong recommendations that we must have more jointness, and we should also be having a CDS. It has taken 20 years to iron out very many differences, and I think at the end of it, it required a strong political decision, a very effective decision, and going into the future, we will see more jointness coming, and both in terms of the operational capabilities, we will see more jointness. And likewise, I hope that we will see much greater integration, even in the logistics, to begin with, amongst the 3 services. And then once you have a single point, it's a lot easier to also integrate with a lot of the logistics which are there in the civilian domain. So when I say logistics, I'm also including, things like communication and all. So I see great future in this decision, and so far it seems to be moving on track, and I think it's only going to make us a lot stronger as a nation.
Right. Sir, an argument made against this move, in a nutshell, talks about the imbalance of power tilting more towards the military than democracy, right? Which means that debates which have dated back from the 60s and the 70s even went as far as to quote like fear of military uprising in situations of unrest as a reason to avoid this move. What are your comments of this?
See, these are very old, sort of apprehensions. which are very quite ill-founded. I mean, we have seen the conduct of our armed forces for almost by 2022, 75 years of independence. I think it's a very, very apolitical armed forces, and those apprehensions, I won't dispute what you're saying. They were there in the years of, shall we say, nation building, formation of all the, institutions of democratic governance. Today, it's a very matured nation, and I don't see any why those apprehensions should be coming anywhere. And for that matter, if you take some of the other leading democracies of the world, whether it is the USA, whether it is UK, whether it is France, they all have similar structures with maybe different designations, but performing more or less the same roles as suited to their operational requirements. So I don't think we should be too concerned about that.
All right. So moving on to another question, with media reports coming out on a daily basis, there are a lot of speculations going on about what is happening, what is actually happening, and there are also a lot of rumors going on the dispute happening at the IndoChina border. So as an expert who has dealt with such scenarios before, what according to you is the real situation?
Well, the real situation is beginning of the summers, both sides carry out our exercises, in these areas.
Right.
Okay, so this year also, I think the Chinese came in for their exercise. And after the exercise, rather than going back, they have chosen to come and dispose in areas close to the line of actual control. And the line of actual control, as you know, is driven by a lot of uncertainties because of the fact that we don't have agreed borders with China. So there are multiple claim lines of the Chinese, and likewise there are our claim lines. So year on year, we have been patrolling up to what we call as our claim lines, and they've also been coming to their claim lines. And this time around, when we were having these patrols in the past also, there used to be face-offs, and we were guided by a set of protocols and agreements. In fact, 4 of them. The first one starting 1996. And what is actually been disturbing this time, and I should think in the last 3 years, where slowly, we were noticing that the face-offs, instead of typical following the drills which are stipulated in those protocols, we have something called the banner drill, that you display a banner to the other side that this is my territory. He takes your picture, goes back, and thereafter you keep resolving them in the border personal meeting. But now, in the last 3 years, we are seeing an element of aggressiveness which has come in the Chinese conduct, and this time around it has become quite violent. So that is how the whole thing has sort of started. And primarily, these guys turned up at 4 different points. One is in the area of Pangongso Lake, that lake which is of that movie Three Idiots fame. So they came in the area of Pangongso, and 3 more points. For ease of reference, let's call them patrolling points north of the Pangongso Lake. So after all that happened, so we had the first meeting with the Chinese on the border. When I say meeting, the meeting at the level of the Corps Commander on 6th of June. So in that meeting, it was agreed that, okay, fine, we will disengage following a certain timeline and schedule and go back. So in this process of disengagement, when a verification was going on the 15th of June, took that very violent clash in Galwan, in which, as you know, we lost 20 people, including the commanding officer, and the Chinese, going by all multiple sources, the figures are coming somewhere in the zone of 40 plus. So that is how, and in fact, they have themselves admitted, I understand, in some agreement, that they have lost their commanding officer and the second in command also. So that is the kind of trouble that took place. So once that 15 June, very unfortunate incident took place, and most sort of, shall we say, unmilitary-like conduct initiated by the Chinese. So thereafter, all those agreements obviously got frozen, and it was resumed again on 22nd June when they agreed once more, it seems, to start disengaging. And one more meeting was held about 3-4 days back to take stock. The long and short of the thing is there is a complete absence of trust because of whatever has happened on the 15th. In fact, in the run up to 15th also. So now, if you see what has happened is when the Chinese came from their exercises into these areas, even if it was meant to be an exercise, they are supposed to inform India as per the protocols, which they have not done. So once they violated that protocol, they came. We also mobilized our forces, and we have, I think, if not more, equal what typically the media is calling mirror deployment. I won't call it mirror deployment, but certainly we have substantial strength to be able to take on any action that we might need. So our reaction, I think, took the Chinese by surprise. And after the Galwan incident, when they decided to get so horribly violent, when they got it back from us, I think that was the second time when they got more, sort of terribly surprised. So that is where we are now. Situation is tense. I don't dispute that. And today we've had the Prime Minister visiting Ladakh. He has addressed the troops over there. He has himself acknowledged the unparalleled valor. And the other important point which the Prime Minister made, I think, was when he said that the days of expansionism are over. Anybody who tries to expand will be defeated. That was a very strong message which was sent out from him. And the third important message which I think which he gave out was that we will invest 3 times in the border area development. So I think some very strong messages by the Prime Minister, because the third message, let me just amplify in a minute. One of the reasons, why the Chinese were, conducting themselves in this kind of a fragile manner, in this kind of a shaky manner, was their, great, shall we say, inability to accept that India was developing its border infrastructure. So if the Prime Minister makes a statement that we are going to invest multiple times for improving our border infrastructure, I think the message is loud and clear.
So, like, in the context of the same, what inferences can we draw from the meeting between Lieutenant General Harinder Singh and his Chinese counterpart? Like, does a meeting at this level indicate the gravity of the situation and the inferences that you can draw from the same?
You see, it's not fair to make inferences from trying to go into the content of the meeting, which we don't know. But if you see the larger context, in that obviously there is a desire from both sides to de-escalate. If the desire was not there, after what happened on 15th, we wouldn't have had the meeting. Okay. So the fact that there was a meeting on 22nd and a meeting that, lasted literally forever, and even the last meeting which took place 3 days back, I think, that also lasted for almost 12 hours plus. So if you see these two factors, yes, you do get a sense that there is a desire to de-escalate. But that said, the point which I was telling, this thing, Juvita, a little while back, is the absence of trust. After an incident of this kind, the trust has gone for a 6, obviously. So therefore, how much to expect, I think, needs to be conditioned by this reality.
One more question on this. So as a member of the National Board of Security Advisory, do you believe that India should continue to follow the non-alignment policy that was being followed earlier? Would this be the right take to the current situation?
You see, I don't think that anything on these matters need to be etched in stone. Okay. I think most important is we should be able to manage to keep our strategic autonomy. As long as we are able to manage our strategic autonomy and thereafter figure out, how we want to sort of manage our international relations for the best interest of the country, I think that is how we should be looking at it, rather than saying, okay, we are one of those, leading members of the non-aligned meet, and so we must remain there forever. I don't think that would be right, because you wouldn't have evolved with the changing ground realities. And even if you see it from another perspective, take NATO, for example, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. They are themselves going through so many challenges because the nature of threat has changed. The NATO was conceived and sort of formed to counter the Soviet threat in Europe. Now, Soviet Union itself collapsed, so was NATO relevant? Okay, but then happened the first Gulf War, in 1991, when Iraq had annexed Kuwait, and the NATO decided to come along and work over here under a different name. But the point is, the spirit of the NATO very much was there. Then likewise, with some reservations in the second Gulf War, and most certainly, post 9/11, when US chose to sort of get into Afghanistan as a retaliation to what happened over there, that was very clearly covered by the fact that Article 5 of NATO says that an attack on any one country, any one nation, will be considered as an attack on all the others. So it kind of gave them the mandate, or gave them the authority to go and intervene. So now if you see it, why I'm making this longish point is to tell you that even those, structures of alignment and alliances are undergoing a change and evolving as we are going into the future. So likewise, even in our case, we need to be very pragmatic. We have to see what is in the best interest of the country and take decisions accordingly, keeping in mind, I reiterate once more, the need to have strategic autonomy.
Right, so, but like an addition to that of the sort, for India, the troubles with the neighbors that they're facing are far more complex, right? Because the Chinese government continues to provide huge amounts of loans and engage in debt trap diplomacy, and the corollary extends into the South China Sea, for example. With all of the sheer number of games that China is playing, what strategy do you think India should apply from a multilateral perspective?
You are already seeing signs of the strategy that India is applying. For example, in the kind of bilateral exercises that we were doing earlier with the US, with Japan, with Australia, with UK, with France. And now some of them have moved up from a bilateral to a trilateral, sort of configuration. So I think that should be giving us enough hint on the manner in which we are going into the future, primarily to deal with this, new rising China, and a pretty aggressive one. If you recall, almost a decade back, China used to keep, sort of harping that it's a peaceful rise. And now what we are witnessing, that peaceful rise theory seems to have, put into the dumps. And if you go back to some of, those, shall we say, very, very old classic theories of international relations, it says that when there is a fast rising power and there is another declining superpower, the chances of conflict are very high. So I think in many ways, this wisdom of centuries earlier is what we are seeing panning out on the ground. And like you said, India, by virtue of the fact that we are sharing borders with China and the fact that those borders are not agreed upon, so there is always a very high potential of conflict. So just like, this, let me call it, intimidatory tactics, which the Chinese are trying, let's say in the South China Sea or in East China Sea, for example, with Vietnam, with Philippines, we are seeing the same thing happening on the land borders here. So one should not be, absolutely rigid, as I said, in trying to say, okay, we don't work in multilateral arrangements. We have to work in multilateral arrangements because of these new kinds of threats. And the other thing, if you look at the irregular threats, for example, when I say irregular, it encompasses a whole wide range of threats, from terrorism to cyber and information and what have you. These are all globalized threats. So globalized threats will require a globalized response. So in order to do that, obviously we need to look at, multilateral security arrangements of countries with similar ideologies, countries which face similar threats. So I think that is important.
Okay. So, the string of pearls doctrine became extremely famous and widely debated in light of the current situation with the Chinese strategy. So, what are your thoughts from a strategic perspective on this doctrine?
You see, it's a nice, shall we say, way of putting out. In some sense, what your friend was asking me on the requirement of multilateral alliances. If you see, he spoke about dead diplomacy and things like that. We are all aware of what's happening in the Hambantota port, for example. We are all aware of their attempts at some of the island nations in the Indian Ocean, their endeavor to come set up bases over there, and then, trying to do military things in the garb of economic activity, like the Gwadar port, for example. So like this, if you were to, sort of mark them on a map, it might actually look like a like a string of pearls. But that said, it is not as if India is not, dealing with that. If a line, sorry, if a string is being drawn around this line, if you see, India is also developing its relationships with multiple, countries of the ASEAN, with Japan, with Australia, with US, and so on. So it's okay if you put yourself at the center of this all, you will see many concentric circles around it. Some circle by China, maybe some circle by India. So it is all part of the larger strategy of how you manage your security with the right moves. Sometimes balancing, sometimes taking shall we say more sharp kind of actions.
All right.
All right. So inferring from the same, the military-industrial complex, as coined by the former U.S. President Eisenhower, plays an important role, especially in India, but military economics in question, at least. What are your thoughts on a growing economic dependency? Do you think our country's economic dependency is what the Chinese are leveraging?
I think you have multiple questions in one question. Let me take one by one. As far
Right.
as the military-industrial complex that you say, we are not dependent on China for anything. Okay, whatever we are getting ex-import, it is sourced from Russia, it is sourced from the US, and some from some of the other countries. There is no sourcing of military equipment from China, so I think that part is out. And now when you come to the commercial side, yes, we are all conscious of the fact that of the trading relationship that we have with China, and to some extent the dependencies which are there, even from something as mundane as Rajma. I believe 50% of our import is coming from China. So there we are. It is obvious that we have to again, when we talk about strategic autonomy in the sense of security, we must be looking at autonomy in the sense of economics as well. So you're probably following what the Prime Minister has announced, with regard to the Atmanirbharta and the kind of investments that they're looking at for this purpose, for self-reliance. I think that is very important. And somewhere, you see, we have to be a little more, now with all that is happening on the borders and stuff like that, we have to be a little prepared to, sacrifice some of the conveniences that have set in because of this dependence, and see how we want to get out of it. Yeah, and if I can give you a parallel, after the nuclear explosion that India had done, we were subjected to multiple sanctions. Because we were subjected to multiple sanctions, actually we developed a lot of things indigenously, whether it is take the cryogenic engines, for example. And so like this, I have just named you one. there are several other areas in which we developed, indigenous capability. So I think in that sense, it's a good wake-up call, rather than going for this easy, call it trading, arrangement of just getting the stuff from there in containers and selling it in India and making some profit. It may be better to, sort of invest more in research and development, invest more in manufacturing. And I think you guys are sitting in the right institute to promote this thought and see how you can take on. I mean, you're perhaps aware on the number of startups of India who are being funded by the Chinese. Obviously, the output of all the education that our academic institutions are providing is being taken away by China. So therefore, I see that A, your question is very important, and B, the thought that we must slowly get out of the shackles of this and find the right balance to be more autonomous, I think is very important.
Right.
All right. So on a lighter note, is there an incident that you would like to share with us from one of your many postings?
Good question. There are so many. Okay, rather than going into some specific incidents, I think if I have to recall from my, for almost 40 years of service, I think the most, I would rate the one in the glacier, Siachen Glacier, as the most challenging. This was in 1986 when the war had just commenced and we were shelling one another on a daily basis, and we were besides the terrain, I was a company commander then. My company headquarters itself was at an altitude of 19,500 feet, and the highest post was around 22,000 feet. And we were deployed there for 6 months, and 6 months, no bath, no haircut, no shaving. So if you see, in many ways, that was a lockdown in its ultimate sense.
Right.
Lockdown at those altitudes closer to God. That's one. Then, of course, the multiple tenures in Kashmir also have their own set of incidents. So yes, and even the experience in Angola was quite one, where you, in many ways, where because of the kind of experience that we have in conflict scenarios, it's a lot easier to go and function in a UN mission when we have to manage the conflict, because when you're interacting or dealing with shall we say the two fighting sides, you can relate to some of the emotions and find navigate your way through those intense emotions to see how conflict resolution is possible. So that way it works very nice, and I think that's important.
All right.
Right. Sir. Seeing that we're a university editorial with the majority of our readers being college students primarily, you've also served in Angola, which you just mentioned, and you were responsible for like tending to the super cyclone in Odisha. All of these were very difficult situations, but like what was the one thing that was constant across all of these difficulties that helped you to handle these issues?
Okay, again, very interesting question you're asking. One was the super cyclone here in Odisha, where I was there as a battalion commander. So with a huge column responsible for districts of Puri, Jagat Singhpur, Kendrapara, and Cuttack. Puri partially, and the other 3 districts fully. So it was quite a task. That was one. Second, again, in September 2014, when the floods happened in Kashmir, I was the corps commander that time. So the whole thing worked. The whole thing survived, I think, because of the rescue relief operations of the army. You may be aware. And the other example which you quoted is Angola. Besides that, when we had this disaster in Uttarakhand, if you recall, in 2013, Kedarnath, that time I was the additional director general military operations. So, well, that time I was involved from staff. But the point which I'm trying to say is, in all of these put together, I think as armed forces, as security forces, why we are able to rise to the occasion, it is because because we have some, very well set drills and procedures to deal with emergencies. So that is what, helps us to work. And the second thing I think is the camaraderie that runs, within the fraternity. And that camaraderie helps you to, uh, tide over the shock and awe, if you will, of whatever is happening. So that being said from the forces side, now when you apply it to the people whom you are trying to, go and help out, again, what you see is the first thing is a panic, an understandable panic. Now, because you have been exposed to these situations many times in your own life, so you can relate to the person, and rather than either panicking or either, getting paralyzed or panicking along with that, you find a way to, help the person and make life whatever easier it is worth. And the other, of course, for the kind of emergency resources that we have, for the kind of, when I say resources, I also include training into it. It is a lot, it gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of adaptability to, keep modifying and sort of, dealing with the situation. Many times, if you go back to the kind of, hardships that they put you through in the training in the National Defense Academy or the Indian Military Academy, now at that point in time, of course, nobody enjoys it. Now, with hindsight, when you think about it, you realize that it is that hardship which gives you, a lot of confidence. This is no big deal, I can tide over it. So somewhere I think it's a nice amalgam of all these things put together that gives you the ability to deal with such challenges.
Right.
So one more question. So the territorial disputes can last longer than decades, and obviously they cause losses on both sides. In your experience, how does a conflict of such nature with territory and sentiments involved ever come to an end?
Well, if you see China for the number of countries that they share borders with, I think only there are a few countries with whom they have not resolved, and India is one of them. And why is the border not being resolved? Obviously, there is a motive. And that motive, I think, is driven by more than the border. It is driven by the way India is growing and the challenge and threat which is perceived from there. It is driven by the fact that India is, building its international relations very well, and it is coming up in a manner which is very different from the Chinese. It's a much more free society, and it's of course a very highly democratic country. And under those circumstances, if you can grow, obviously there is a model which, if exposed fully to the Chinese, will start raising questions on their model itself. I mean, again, if I were to draw a parallel to this border incident now, look at it. Today is what? I think almost 20 days since the Galwan incident happened.
Right.
Till now, the Chinese have not officially, sort of accepted their casualties. On the 22nd June, I was seeing in one of the media reports, on the 22nd of June, when their foreign office spokesperson was asked how many casualties, he says, I don't have the information. On 23rd June, the following day, when he was asked again a similar question, to say that, look, Indian media is saying the casualty is more than 40. His response was, that's false information.
Okay.
Now look at this on the Chinese side and look at it on our side. Well, my condolence to all the people, their families and their units. But the fact of the matter is, as a nation, we have ensured that they are given the homage, given all the respects that they must. And today our Prime Minister has traveled to Ladakh to go and tell their units, tell the Indian Army, tell the Indian Armed Forces that the whole nation respects what they have done. Now compare this with the Chinese model, where nobody is even saying what has happened. Now look at it from the point of view of a PLO fellow, that look, here my commanding officer, my comrades have died. And nobody in this country, I'm talking about China, is even recognizing that threat. So look at the vast comparison which is there in the methods in which these two countries function. So I would be very surprised if these thoughts are not coming in the minds of the people over there. How they are going to react with it, let us see. Time will tell. Look at the way the protests are happening in Hong Kong, for example.
Right.
So, yeah.
All right. Shivang, do you have a question?
Not particularly. So we've aside from all of this, in general, we've talked about a considerable number of things with respect to China, right? The relevance that India has maintained in terms of the border dispute has held over a long period of time. What's the Indian standard on the border, and how do you see it continuing, considering that there have been multiple statements made in recent times? And this is something that you already primarily answered, but just a short note to end it.
Well, I think on the Indian side, we are very clear that we get back to status quo on the positions that were there in end April. And that, I think, position is not, there is going to be no compromise to that position. And I'm sure that our people will maintain that come what may.
All right.
Right.
All right. Thank you, sir. Before we end, is there anything you would like to tell the youths that would be watching this interview?
My message to you guys, loud and clear, came during the course of your, course of our conversation today. I think you people are most ideally placed to get out of this dependency, whether it is in R&D, whether it is in manufacture. I think you are the best placed to be able to take the nation out of that. You contribute to the nation by doing a lot of things. Of course, I do hope some of you join the armed forces and serve there. But as an elderly person of the country, as a veteran of the Indian armed forces, we would be completely delighted to see some wonderful indigenous solutions coming from institutes like us and helping us to get out of this import dependency that we have for our armed forces. And for the kind of money that we are spending in export, imagine if that money were to be entering the Indian cycle of economics, how much more we would have been able to gain. So my message to you all is help the country to become more and more self-reliant. And I wish you all very well for that mission.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. It was a pleasure talking to you. And
thank you.